seen thus far in Minecraft speedrun history. The Nether entry was relatively slow, with a time of 2:53, but an immediate Bastion and Fortress, coupled with Bone in the 00 chunk, instantly showed the immense potential of this seed. Essentially, every required Nether resource was right next to his portal, and the 00 Bone gave him a general idea at where he should build his exit portal to get close to the stronghold. At the Bastion, Obsidian quickly filled Brentilda's inventory, and he was able to get every other Nether resource very efficiently, so it was time to head over to the fortress. Due to the soul sand biome, there were many blaze spawns, and with solid drop rates, he had everything he needed to leave the Nether at around 7 minutes. It's at this point when Brentilda did something pretty controversial. He paused for an extended period of time. You see, the bone does have a correlation to where the stronghold will be, but unless a speedrunner wants to memorize 48 sets of coordinates, they need to reference a chart, one that Brentilda didn't immediately have on hand when he needed it. Big streamers will just have their chats find the right coordinates, which was a luxury not afforded to Brentilda during this run. But once he got them, he unpaused and went exactly where the chart told him to go.
Dude.
Exiting the Nether at 8:06 is far from exceptional. At this point, runners had done so in under 7 minutes. But finding yourself inside the stronghold right next to the portal room is unbelievably lucky.
I can't pause. Dude. What?
9 minutes and 36 seconds. A once theoretical milestone had just happened. Remember when everybody thought Corbanos had killed a category with a perfect run? Well, Brentilda just killed the category with a shockingly imperfect speedrun. Nobody else had even gotten a time under 11 minutes, and he had a sub 10 after entering the Nether at nearly 3 minutes. It was absolutely groundbreaking, but nobody truly knew what the impact of this run would be. Following the completion of the greatest Minecraft speedrun ever, Brentilda never really capitalized off the publicity. He didn't want the attention. In fact, he was so content with his time that he never speedran 1.16 RSG after that day, which I think says a lot about the category. But the reaction from everyone else was dramatically different. The very first video on this channel that blew up was titled FE666, the Minecraft speedrunner who is loading into the next seed before you finish reading this title. And it's about a runner who is exceptionally determined to get a world record. If you remember, FE once held this title with his 11:50 time, but once it was broken, and especially after Brentilda's run, he kicked things into high gear. FE666's pace of resetting runs was unlike anything seen prior. About 4/5 of the seeds he loaded into were insta resets, and only around 1 in 20 entered the Nether at an average pace of 242. From here, a minuscule 1 in 500 runs would make it to the second structure in the Nether, and 1 in 1,000 would feature him crafting Eyes of Ender. In 35,000 tracked resets since achieving his world record, he entered the stronghold 5 times, with an average pace of 10:13, and out of those, the end dimension was only reached once. At the time of making that video, FE666 had been streaming 1.16 random seed glitchless runs for 44% of the last month, an unprecedented time investment, and the best run he ever got during that insane grind ended right in front of the end portal at 9 minutes and 10 seconds because one of his Eyes of Ender broke. This was not even world record pace, but it was one of the fastest paces anybody had ever been on. It was clear that if runners wanted to get serious about beating Brentilda, something needed to change. Around June of 2021, less than 2 months after the sub 10, many streamers began using a strategy called multi-instancing. Basically, if it's inefficient to reset seeds one at a time, why not play on several instances of Minecraft in order to decrease downtime between runs? This was a real game changer. If runners could reset seeds quicker, they'd have a higher chance of running into good seeds, and in turn, getting good times. The strategy was immediately adopted by all of the top runners, but just as it helped to solve one problem, it created another. Simply, you need a good CPU to be able to run multiple instances of Minecraft at once, and a good CPU costs a lot of money. During the period of time where everyone was using one instance, nobody got even remotely close to beating Brentilda, making multi-instance a natural development. But was it a positive development? Long gone were the days where any speedrunner could load into a Minecraft world and have a chance at a record. The only way to have a reasonable shot required expensive hardware for extensive resetting. This was a debate that divided the community. Those with a nice PC started adopting the strategy, but many who couldn't afford such a luxury advocated strongly to ban it. In the end, the quest for progress was stronger than the quest for fairness. Multi-instancing was quickly being adopted by anybody who had a good enough CPU. But the grind to beat Brentilda was far from over. On August 26th, 4 months after the run, Illumina found himself entering the end ahead of Brentilda's pace. If he just got a lucky dragon perch, the record would be his, but instead, he watched the dragon fly around the end for 3 minutes before it finally cooperated, then finished with a time barely under 11 minutes. This was basically the first glimmer of hope that a faster time was on the horizon, but also around this point, a certain debate began popping up. In a 1.16 RSG speedrun, if the player can obtain 20 obsidian from a bastion, they can exit the nether, triangulate where the stronghold is, go back into the nether, and build another portal in hopes of going straight into the structure. This is called calculated travel, and essentially, runners could do what Brentilda did, but without having to get ridiculously lucky. If you remember from earlier, the world record featured a lot of pausing, 1 minute and 33 seconds to be exact. And while some of that was very reasonable, namely pulling up the chart, Brentilda spent a good amount of time paused due to nerves after he found himself right next to the portal room. In order to negate hardware differences, Minecraft speedruns are timed with in-game time as opposed to real time, which doesn't count the pauses, so it was still a world record. But this sparked a near immediate rule change, which basically stated that pausing for extended periods of time is not allowed. The reason this pause rule is relevant is because calculating the location of the stronghold is quite difficult and requires doing math under time constraints. However, by using a stronghold calculator, this aspect of the run would be made near automatic with an external program known as NinjaBrain Bot. In the beginning of 2021, the community voted to ban calculators in a poll, with both sides of the argument clearly laid out, but the dilemma was far from straightforward. One argument in favor of allowing them read, calculators remove an RNG factor from the run. While having to manage eyes to make sure you don't lose too many is an interesting part of the run to many people, the fact that you can occasionally simply get screwed over by it if you get extremely unlucky is certainly bad. In the anti-calculator section, one of the arguments basically states the exact same thing. Calculators remove parts of the run that people like. It was at this point when I began to realize that the entire debate was essentially summed up in the final sentence. There was almost unanimous consent from all top-level runners that calculators are bad. The majority felt that if stronghold calculators were allowed and the skill ceiling was lowered, that was not in the spirit of speedrunning. But that was 3.5 months before Brentilda's run. Only 7 months after it, the mod team held another poll, and this time, the result was 58% unbanned, 41% banned, with top runners being especially in favor of an unbanned. It took just over half a year of nobody getting within 50 seconds of Brentilda's time for the community to dramatically change its mind. Part of the reason was due to a weird gray area with what was and wasn't considered a calculator, but also, by just looking at the shift in the meta, it's clear why people's perspectives changed so much. If a player truly aspired to beat Brentilda with a bad CPU, they must either go through single instance hell or upgrade their CPU in order to go through multi-instance hell. The only difference is that when multi-instancing, the runner at least has a modicum of a chance at pulling a god seed, getting good RNG, and not choking. But I haven't even talked about level 3. A good CPU can handle 4 instances with no problem, but a really good CPU can run 9 or even 16, and with that many, all the runner has to do is glance at the first frame, decide if they like what they see, and if the answer is no, reset the seed. Many runners were hungry for progress, investing huge amounts of time, energy, and CPU into the grind, and the stars were just never aligning for that sub-Brentilda. The results from the second poll were reflective of how the community felt toward the strive for progress. 1.16 RSG is a relentless maze of RNG and a tool that can help navigate that. was just the thing many people wanted. January 22nd, 2022, 279 days after his run, at 12:58 p.m. PST, Brentilda said in the Minecraft speedrunning Discord server, "Flip it, somebody is gonna get sub 10 in the next 24 hours." At this point, not a single person other than Brentilda had achieved that milestone, but just 9 hours after sending that message, Cube 1337X completed a run with a final time of 9:08. Of course, the time to beat has since dropped considerably, with the world record exchanging hands a few times, but the impact Brentilda's run had on the future of Minecraft speedrunning cannot go understated. We're now several years removed from all of this. The world record is approaching the 7-minute barrier, and every record starting with cubes has featured multi-instancing and calculators. Brentilda's run was so far ahead of its time that it expedited the implementation of several strategies that forever changed the category.
Before this is over, I will be making some fanboys mad. And I'm gonna start with a shot at
Big Daddy Red.
You could argue that Nintendo is the most important console maker of all time. Originally a trading card and toy company, they found some initial success in gaming in the Midway space, but it was the 1 million units of their first home console, the Color TV series, that locked in their destiny. Too bad the thing's a D. And look, I'm sorry, but first generation consoles really don't hold up. And while our ranking system will account for the lower expectations that gamers would have had at the time, kind of an opinions adjusted for inflation, if you will, at the end of the day, a major consideration has to be, historical importance aside, how fun are the games today? The good news is that when we reach Nintendo's third generation offering, the answer becomes very, in large part thanks to the inclusion of hardware scrolling backgrounds. Look, I know that doesn't sound like a huge deal, but this is what platforming looks like on the competition. Start on the left, jump over obstacle, reach the right side of the screen, rinse and repeat. Woohoo. Meanwhile on the NES, look at him go! Woohoo! And upgraded cartridges would push its capabilities even further, changing video games forever. The Famicom, or Family Computer as it was known in Japan, quickly took the crown for the best-selling console in history. And thanks to Nintendo's savvy third-party publishing negotiations, living room-friendly branding, and focus on content quality, they would continue that success in the challenging North American market. In our minds, the NES marks the end of console gaming's infancy and the beginning of its childhood years. It was the start of huge franchises like Final Fantasy, The Legend of Zelda, Metroid, Mario, and more, and it was also affordable. It's an A. And the only reason is that, as innovative as they were, most of its best games are essentially obsolete. Every franchise that I just mentioned got a bigger sequel on Nintendo's very next console that was better in almost every way. And we're gonna get to that after this quick message from our sponsor.
Ridge! Hey, is that a boring old bifold wallet in your pocket, or are you just happy to see the alternative, Ridge's sleek and high-quality wallets? Well, in any case, go to the link below and use code Linus to save 10% off your purchase and get free shipping.
The Super Nintendo Entertainment System didn't change the formula much, but its more refined technology gave developers a platform to focus on what's most important, making great games. And this was clear right out of the gate with F-Zero, a flashy look at the future using the 3D power of Mode 7, and Super Mario World, which is still the best 2D Mario game. And the hits just kept coming, with a library of games that ranges from still playable to contenders for best ever in the RPG and 2D platforming genres. There were some turds too, of course, but Super Nintendo is our first S tier. And unfortunately, Nintendo's last for a while. With competition ramping up on all sides and pirate flags flying high, Nintendo doubled down on their walled garden philosophy, leading to the big error that, along with several others, would tank this generation for them, choosing proprietary cartridges over CDs. I get it. Nintendo's lucrative licensing agreements were easier to control when they ran the production line, but cartridges cost many times as much and hold only a fraction of the amount of data. This resulted in developers making furious compromises to run on Nintendo's 64-bit machine, which is a shame because the raw performance of the N64 was actually at the top of its generation. It just wouldn't be fully unlocked until decades later by community modders. Sometimes limitations breed creativity though, and the N64 ended up with a very strong library, at least if you focus on its GOATs. Ocarina of Time and Mario 64 still come up in those conversations, and most first-party titles on the system are, or at least were, outstanding, even if Yoshi got done kind of dirty. The problem is that the good third-party games for the console were rare. Get it? And we'd need to see a deeper library for a higher placement. It's gonna be B. The good news is that Nintendo learned. For the GameCube, they worked on their relationships, ensuring that it was easy to develop for, and they even chose optical media, albeit at a silly, smaller size. So the old purple lunchbox would end up with a more complete library, with some entries in long-running franchise even considered their best, like Smash Melee, Metroid Prime, and Resident Evil 4. Okay, the controller sucked Donkey Kong for pretty much any game that wasn't specifically designed for it, but at least it wasn't as alien or flaccid as its older sibling? B. It's a B. It's just too bad that nobody cared at the time, leading Nintendo to a major shift in strategy that persists today. To avoid competing head-to-head with Microsoft and Sony's HD systems, Nintendo basically repackaged the Cube into an overclocked rectangle with some extra RAM and launched it alongside a motion controller that, by the way, also was originally designed for the GameCube. At the time, the Wii felt a little bit disappointing considering its Revolution codename. But if you felt that way, you were probably a real gamer. Because for everyone else, it was something else. It was fun. It would be easy to dismiss the console based on the mountain of wiggle-waggle shovelware that was published for it. But it was Nintendo's first backwards-compatible home system, and its early lead in sales incentivized third-party developers to put in the work to build out its library, even if the ports weren't the best ones available. Now, sadly, for emulation and eShop enthusiasts, many of its most interesting titles are trapped there because of the novel control scheme, but we are still putting the Wii on the A tier for all the retirement homes that are still bowling and golfing. Unfortunately, like the people in those homes, the Wii's gimmicks did get kind of old, and its successor was probably Nintendo's lowest point. It had more power than the aging 7th gen hardware that Nintendo launched it against, but it also had confusing branding and a quasi-portable controller screen gimmick that most games completely failed to take advantage of. Not helping matters, new first-party games were slow to show up due to a focus on HD remasters, which led to slow sales, which led to poor third-party support again. It did get some unironically great games, including kicking off Mario Kart 8's decade of Nintendo refusing to give us another Mario Kart. But today, there are fewer and fewer reasons to leave an unmodded Wii U plugged in, other than its ability to output older Wii games via HDMI. We're gonna give it a C. Luckily, the Switch immediately switched up the conversation, delivering on the hybrid handheld promises of the Wii U and putting Nintendo back on top. It launched with what is arguably the best game from one of the strongest gaming franchises ever, and has followed it up with banger after banger after banger. The enormous install base has prompted developers to move heaven and earth to shrink their games to work on it, resulting in sometimes a pretty good experience, especially if you consider that the console is little more than an NVIDIA Shield tablet with custom firmware and controllers. It is underpowered compared to the machines of today, and even the machines of its time, but it is a great way to pack Mario and the gang into the screen-safe slot of your LTT backpack, lttstore.com. We are giving the Switch our second S for revitalizing the handheld gaming market. As for the future, it remains to be seen whether Nintendo can retain the Switch's momentum against the rise of PC handhelds and the rumors of Sony's return, not to mention Microsoft's entry, but I'm hopeful. Surely the good, bad pattern can't continue. Speaking of things that couldn't continue, Sega. And oh boy, do they ever have weirder origins than I realized. The Japanese giant was founded by Americans who sold slot machines to US Army bases, which is why they were at one point called Service Games. Weird foreshadowing, by the way, but okay. Sega's first home console, like Nintendo's, was designed to play stripped-down arcade ports, and the SG-1000 was in that sense better than the color TV, with interchangeable cartridges and a fair bit more power, which is neat. But the MK3, or as you might know it in the West, the Master System, is where Sega's sales went parabolic. We are giving the SG-1000 a D, which won't surprise anyone, and we're giving the Master System a C, which will surprise folks in the regions where it would go on to have an exceptionally long life with some kind of impressive peripherals. Everywhere else, though, it suffered from its focus on arcade-style games and Sega's notoriously bad habit of supplanting their systems a little too quickly. Just 3 years after the Master System, Sega launched the Mega Drive, or Genesis for us Yankadoodles, powered by the Motorola 68000, a familiar 16-bit chip that powered countless other arcade games and home computers. Sega brought blast processing to the party, which is a real thing, we think. No one is 100% sure what it was, but most likely it referred to DMA, or the ability to directly drive a CRT through brute force, regardless of the VDP's palette limitations. It also had a more powerful CPU than the Super Nintendo, which arrived 2 whole years later, and, thanks to some clever design choices, it even had backwards compatibility with Master System games. Not that it needed it. The Genesis has a phenomenal library that is undeniably Sega's best. Even beyond the blue blur, there's a huge variety of games designed to appeal to a slightly more mature audience, thanks to Sega's looser third-party ecosystem, and many Genesis games just straight up play better than their SNES competition, even if they usually look a little worse. I wanted so badly to put it in the S tier, but before we can rank it, we need to talk about some of the truly baffling moves that Sega made late on in its life cycle. First, they launched a CD add-on. That was actually a mild success, allowing its aging 80s hardware to push past the newer SNES in some key ways, like improved sprite scaling, as well as CD quality audio and the ability to play interactive FMV video games, if you're into those. But then, as this sort of next-gen stopgap, Sega designed and launched the 32X add-on around the same time that their completely next-gen full 32-bit console, the Saturn, would launch in Japan. Making matters much worse, Sega surprise launched the console 4 months early in North America, only for Sony to immediately counter by announcing the PlayStation would be just $299. So if you're confused trying to follow exactly what I'm talking about here, imagine how consumers felt at the time. What did I just buy? And what is this new thing? Sega, in one stroke, burnt the goodwill that they had fought so hard to claim from Nintendo, and suddenly they were behind by a lot. Genesis, A. As for the Saturn, it was a complete bust everywhere but Japan, which I guess is what happens when you go from, we're gonna make the best darn 2D system for true arcade to, oh my god, here comes Sony, and they've got 3D! Now, in hindsight, the Saturn has a pretty incredible library of hidden gems that I would highly recommend that you check out. But in the 90s, when 3D was the new hotness, developers just couldn't be arsed to learn its eccentric 4-chip architecture, and Sega's penultimate effort would pave the way for the company's overall exit from the console hardware space. We're giving it a C for, come on, it at least deserved a chance. The Saturn is the most underrated system that Sega has ever made, maybe even by us. And I'm saying that knowing that most people would think that award goes to Sega's final effort, the Dreamcast. With a modem for network play built right in and a high-quality VGA-capable output, it was truly ahead of its time. And between great ports to the system, not to mention a slew of phenomenal new games, the Dreamcast would get off to the strongest start yet in video game history. That is, until a big ol' black DVD player, that we're gonna get to in a bit, don't worry, arrived holding its pink slip. Less than 3 years after its launch, Sega announced that not only was the Dreamcast headed out behind the barn, their entire console business was going with it. Sega, we salute you for your service, and we're giving the Dreamcast a strong B for being something that is still worth dusting off to this day. The good news is that in the same year that Sega admitted defeat, a new contender would pick up their torch. Microsoft was looking to make a little gaming machine of their own, and what's cool is you can still see some of that Sega DNA in the original Windows 2000 Light machine. 6 face buttons, a focus on network play, and even rumored Dreamcast compatibility, though that never came to fruition in spite of the fact that it used similar Windows CE and DirectX development tools. I mean, sure, the Xbox compared to the fully cut